Thank you, Naina, for joining me today for a conversation here. And I know you're the president of FICCI. Maybe you can start off by just describing FICCI and its role it plays with the Indian industries, but particularly so how it plays for kind of India's role in the global markets.
Okay, well, FICCI is the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, and it is India's apex chamber, a national chamber which has been in existence for 85 years and represents industry and industry's needs into government, and you specifically asked into global markets. But clearly one of the reasons we're here this time is accompanying our the Indian Minister of Industry and Commerce, who is leading, therefore, us as a business delegation into discussions here in the UK. Now, the role of FICCI therein is, of course, to nurture trade and industry, to assist in those dialogues. So in this particular case, it is for the cause of Indian industry, so it would be Indian exports, it would be Indian investments into foreign markets, but also to aid and assist foreign investment into India, which is so critical for India. And in fact, FICCI has a partnership with the government in an organization called Invest India, which handholds foreign investors, particularly smaller companies that can't easily find their way into the Indian market, actually handholds them through that process.
That's very helpful backdrop. And some of the conversations that I've had and we see, especially in the developed world, in conversations with the CEOs of multinational firms, but also with smaller companies and smaller investors, is people do see the opportunities in India. And one of the questions which comes to their mind is, does India provide the level of transparency, the standards of global corporate governance and risk management and some of the best practices which people take for granted in developed parts of the world? Do those things exist in India, or does it fall short to global expectations? And what is FICCI or the Indian industries doing to kind of raise the bar? Yeah. And is there any perspective that you can share on that?
Yeah. So I think it becomes important to look at this from specific industries. Don't forget that we have had a long tradition of large multinationals and mid-sized ones operating in India. And they have done that with great success and great aplomb. They have functioned in these markets, they have been profitable, and many have in fact continued to invest, as indeed even as we speak, Unilever had announced a huge investment into India to up their stake to 75%. Which should they achieve what they want to, could well be close to $10 billion in a single tranche. And these are players who are in India, operate to the highest standards of governance, and have chosen to continue to invest and invest in very large numbers. So you've got at one end companies that work in an environment which enables them to grow and produce profit. And I think classic examples of that are the Unilevers of the world, who have seen their businesses in India grow and flourish, in fact. There are equally companies that I think right now face the challenge, not just in terms of foreign investment, but Indian investors as well, which is in the infrastructure sectors, where India has a huge challenge right now in the power sector, because their issues to do with coal linkages, issues to do therefore with the regulatory environment have stalled. Yeah. Either because the environment has come in as an issue, or coal supply, which is also related to environment, has come in as an issue, and government contracts themselves are therefore up for review yet again. And it gives the impression therefore of things having absolutely fallen apart. The good news here is, the bad news is that is true. The good news is that there is a Cabinet Committee of Investment now, which is project by project helping clear this mess. And many of these projects are therefore again seeing the light of day, and they're critical not just because these projects themselves are needed, we need the power projects, but also because if we don't sort this out, we would have a non-performing assets in the banking sector going up, and then monies for new projects in these sectors would be hard to come by. So it's very important that these projects get sorted out. So you've got in those sectors clearly issues which need resolution. And then there's the overriding issue which I suspect you were hinting at, and that is to do with India through a corruption index, etc. And I think that, to some extent, I answer also by saying that there are many, many companies in India which have operated for many years to the highest standard. So you don't have to be part of a system that is corrupt. Yes, your permissions may take longer, but the long and short of it is you do get that permission. And if you're in no hurry and you live by the rules of the land, there's nothing that gets in your way either. So you can operate through the highest levels of governance if you choose to. If you want to play the game, which is typically to bend the rules to your favor, then the system is also open to that. And I think that is the aspect of corruption which gets highlighted. But there are many, many companies, including ones that I work for, who have never faced the demand in terms of corruption because you have a reputation for not paying on the one hand, and on the other, you have flourishing, very profitable businesses
so I think,
despite that.
I think this is a very key point that you're raising here, right? That you really do have the choice that if you want to maintain your highest governance standards, there's absolutely nothing in the way for you to not do that. And there are organizations like FICCI and others which can come in to help you understand and explain on how to navigate through the regulatory machinery of the country so that people can play by the rule book and still do well.
Yes.
So there is a support infrastructure for people who want to build a clean, well-governed, highest standard corporations in the Indian markets and still be successful and still be competitive.
Yes, and I think the other aspect that becomes important to recognize is there are two sets of rules to play with. One is the central government, which sets the overall charters, and often that is the area which gets the most media hype. But where the rubber really hits the ground is in the states, because that is where you really need the permissions to the land, the setting up of your plant, the permissions for water, electricity, etc. And the story there varies. There are clearly states which are seen as very industry friendly, and it is well known that they will deliver all your permissions nicely wrapped and with a red ribbon and hand it to you, which leaves very little room for some of the headache factors, and others which are less so. So you have to pick the state well and recognize that India has become a much more regionalized message as industry goes, because permissions by and large at the center have fallen away. They're not really needed.
So
most sectors are automatic approvals.
So it's more of a federal system which is developing in India. So there's nuances which are different between different states.
Exactly. So you have to pick your state well. You have to know that they will welcome you. You have to know where to go to resolve those issues, and not really be looking at what is the central government, other than the charters of permissions, issues. And I think we can do a better job in terms of some of the sectors having stronger regulators, for example, or regulatory mechanisms, which is really the discipline that surrounds each sector. And by that I mean the regulated sectors, I mean power, telecom, etc., where if there's clarity around the regulation, then you see less litigation and less need to actually engage at the center.
So one of the asks which people will have, especially people who are looking at deploying large amounts of foreign capital and so forth, would be, is there some sort of a sovereign understanding of risk for the country, and are there studies done to help explain this in a way that it provides defensible data and evidence to how the country is actually benchmarking itself with other countries, in terms of its risk index. And I know the World Economic Forum has done, they benchmark around the world at a global level. So are there specific efforts, initiatives within India to kind of raise this debate to the next level and say that not only are we the land of opportunity and a driver of growth, but we also do so in an environment where we are managing the downside risk, the regulatory concerns that you have, to really become the destination of choice for foreign direct investments. So is there a strategy that you guys are either enacting or executing on as part of FICCI or otherwise? Something which you want to share?
So I again will not answer this on an overarching basis, because actually again it goes back to sector by sector.
Right.
You almost need to answer it. So what's happening in telecom? What's happening in tax? What's happening in the power sector? Because each one has specific issues.
Right.
Each is at a different stage of evolution. So at one end, say if you take the financial sector, one which I know well given my hat as a banker, if you look at SEBI or you look at indeed at the Reserve Bank of India, I would say as regulators go, we have a very high level of regulation and regulatory excellence, because we have weathered the storms that the rest of the world has actually maybe fallen foul of quite well, because these regulators and the regulations around them are strong. We have a very vibrant stock market, we have a vibrant banking sector. As a result, do we have the same levels of excellence as regulators and the regulatory mechanisms in every sector? The answer is no. Clearly, we need to aspire to that. And I believe that one of the big themes that we at FICCI are working very closely on is to create both a regulatory skill set. So from where do you draw for on these regulators? Can we have a common cadre of regulators who are trained and understand that regulating for the health of the sector is what is required? It is not just to damn industry, but to ensure that the vision for what the sector should look like is the core message.
Absolutely.
Protection of the consumer is the core message, but equally the health of the industry that you regulate is a core space as well. So how can we have strong regulators? What is the pool of people we can draw on for those regulators, and what should that regulator and the regulatory mechanism around it look like? And is something that FICCI is doing a lot of work on, and doing it sector by sector.
And by the way, I think there's going to be a lot of interest on part of US multinationals or European companies to participate in helping train and enable and bring some of the best practices of what has worked
and what has not.
And what has not.
Yes,
right?
Because we have
learned
both directions.
Exactly.
Absolutely,
And those would be very, very relevant here. But let me change the topic a little bit, and and I've been thinking about the notion of resilience. And if you look at the country of India, and are we thinking about how to make the country more resilient? And India has a history of thousands of years. And the question is, how does the company react under stress? Whether the stress comes because dollar is strengthening or the currency is weakening, or if there is natural kind of disaster scenarios, or there are monsoon failures or climate issues or whatever else might be the case. How are we looking at stress testing the Indian system, if you will, to again understand, is there a framework of resilience that is being developed as a national framework? And again, that is being communicated back to global investors and global CEOs and people who want to engage with India as a national framework. And again, that is being communicated back to global investors and global CEOs and people who want to engage with India for all the opportunity that it presents. Just a food for thought, and would love to kind of get your thoughts on this notion of resilience, if you will.
Yeah, but when you look at resilience the way you've defined it, so you ask about what happens with floods as we have them right now in the Himalayan states, in Uttarakhand and to some extent in Himachal. Now, the resilience or testing therein is all about disaster management. Does it impact industry in the south or even in the northern states of Delhi and so on? No. So is it the resilience of a country in terms of its attractiveness as industry that gets impacted? Because there will always be a problem somewhere given the vast size of India. A rape doesn't mean that all women in India get raped, right? So in terms of the sheer incidence, it becomes important to recognize that you will see, it's like looking at Europe as a whole and then having a problem in one country and then determining that all of Europe is like Greece, right? And that is what India is. And you cannot draw a parallel therein. So I've been hearing tales from the management that is happening through you mentioned the floods, and therefore the floods in the north of India, and the work that the Indian Army there is doing is phenomenal.
Okay.
The interviews from people who have been saved and have come through are just phenomenal. I've heard stories about how the foot soldiers have lain down in what was water and ground in order to provide what was literally a footbridge for people to walk over them, to get over chasms which were otherwise not, because there are many feeble and very old people who have gone on pilgrimage and been stuck up there. I can't think of many armies in the world where individuals would put themselves out to this order to save their own people, of course, but to save them from natural disaster. And I think that is also the strength of India, the ability of its people. This does not require an army commander, the Prime Minister of India, to say, lie down in the mud and allow people to walk over you. These are individuals who make that decision. Yeah. And I think Indians are very good at finding solutions. They don't always rely on a high command to tell you what to do when you know that what you have to do is the right thing to do. So I do think a resilience of a nation is built on its people, its ability to take these decisions, to take the right decision at the right time. And that, to my mind, is the strength of India. It's the strength of India in industry because it enables entrepreneurship to blossom irrespective of what the challenges are, to find the solutions in a way that enable enterprise to move ahead.
And I think perhaps one of the things which one can look into is organizations like FICCI and others can perhaps help promote the positive flow of news around what the country is doing to develop its resilience and showcase some of this stuff. Because what happens today is media loves the bad news.
Yes, I'm afraid so. And the negativity
feeds on itself. So there is this recurring theme that flows into the Western world and into the developed world as well, where they see some of these things blown out of proportion. And it creates anxiety and unnecessary skepticism. Perhaps the feedback here would be that perhaps some of the good news that like the one which you just shared also needs to make its way so that people can get a more informed way of how the country actually is operating versus the skewed view which they get from the popular media. So do you have any thoughts on this or any?
I mean, there are many. I've been thinking about the Arab awakening and what you're seeing, whether it's in Egypt or Brazil. And I think in India, we have had years of peaceful protest. And protest will happen. Protest must be allowed to happen. And indeed, it is about crowd control at the end of the day. So India's, whether it's a police force or whatever, the balance between brutality and enabling or allowing a process of democracy to happen is a fine line. But through years of experience, I think India has arrived at that. And I think the world can learn from what that crowd control is about, because in India, you get a crowd forming very quickly, and it's all about numbers and people. But the fact that every situation doesn't become one that flares up, I think is also a lesson. The way we conduct our elections, I mean, the sheer numbers that will turn out to vote. 800 million people turn out to vote. It's done electronically, and it's never questioned by the opposition party or the party that loses, which tells me that the credibility of the process is such, or election commissioners that will wrap a minister or a candidate in the same way if rules are broken. So these are the strengths of the country and the processes which enable it to go forward. Sure, there's a lot that we have to do right. One of the issues which has clearly been catching a lot of attention in the international world, but is also an issue for Indian industry, is to do with retrospective regulation, particularly to do with tax. And the good news here is that the government is attempting to find a solution around this and has accepted that retrospective regulation is bad practice. It has been openly admitted that this is not the way to go, and to ensure that we do not have to fall into this trap again, I think would be important.
I think this is very, very insightful and educational, and I think people, some of these messages that you have shared today, absolutely tells the true picture of how the country is thinking and how the Indian industry is thinking. So thanks very much today, Naina, for your views, and good luck.
Thank you very much.